Doing a daily Bible devotional has been the best thing that I've done for myself. My time in the Old Testament only proves to me again and again and again that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked above all things. When I'm reading the New Testament, I read it within the context of when Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Everything in the New Testament is just an expansion of one of those two thoughts. Those are the two lenses I look through when I'm reading the Old or the New Testament. So get a cup of coffee, sit back, and join me as I think with my mouth open. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another fabulous day in the Lord's neighborhood, and welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host, and here's my coffee. All together now. In the beginning, coffee. And lo, it was very good. And it is. It still is. I love coffee. Thank you, Jesus. And I'm not taking his name in vain when I say that. I'm thanking Jesus for the invention of the coffee bean. He did well. All right, we're picking up today. David has finally started on the run away from Saul. He is now officially an outlaw of the kingdom. He went to the hometown of Goliath in yesterday's chapter, and I'm not sure exactly why he did that, but he did. Perhaps he was thinking this might be the last place Saul would go to look for him, but the king there in Goliath's hometown wasn't about to have David hang around his town. So David ended up fleeing from there. In fact, he had to pretend to be insane in order to effect his escape there. It was a bad mistake on his part. But that was a good example of what yesterday's lesson was about for me anyway. When you don't know what to do something. So an old preacher used to tell me, and he says, when you're on the move, it's easier to move you. The way he put it was, it's hard to steer a car that's parked. So when you don't know what to do something, and trust that the sovereign God will move you this way or that, will open doors or close doors. So that was to me, that was an example of that premise. When you don't know what to do something. David fled to Goliath's hometown, thinking that would be the last place, I'm sure, that Saul would look for him, but the king wasn't having anything to do with it. He made plans to do harm to David, so David pretended to be insane and left. That's where we pick up today's narrative in chapter 22. Just start reading it. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. Now you stop and think. David becoming an enemy of the king also meant that his family was on the king's hit list. And Saul would very likely go after David's family in order to get to David and out of his rage at David, quote unquote, betraying him. So his father's household went to him at the cave of Adullam. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented, they gathered around him, and he became the commander. He's like a Robin Hood, prince of thieves. About 400 men with him. That's a pretty good-sized force in those days, 400 men. Those who would gather around David were about 400. Eventually, these ranks would swell to as many as 600, and they were all united by the fact that they all were living in adverse conditions. They were outlaws, and they were attracted to the charismatic David as their leader. Now, such bands of malcontents and social misfits were not uncommon in those days. We notes here, Judges 9 and 11, there were bands of rebels all over the place. Well, from there, David went to Mizpah, to Moab, and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do with me?" So he left them with the king of Moab and stayed with him, and they stayed with him, the king of Moab, as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, don't stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. All right. David was honoring his father and mother according to the commandment. And he wanted to protect them, realizing that they would be in danger since David was in danger. And he took them to Moab because, well, his great-grandmother was Ruth, a Moabitess. There's Moabite blood in David's line. So he took him to Moab to see if they would take care of his parents, and apparently they did. So he's taking care of his family, and now he's freer to roam and do whatever God would have him to do. Now, the prophet Samuel, where was he in all of this? Samuel had anointed him king maybe a couple decades before. Samuel's getting pretty old by this point. He's probably not traveling around as much. And you notice how it said up here, let's go back up here a second. The prophet Gad said to David. So David had prophets advising him, just like Samuel had done previously to Saul and to him. I was thinking maybe Samuel's getting too old to travel. And another point of interest, we don't read anything in here about Saul going after Samuel. He would have a grudge against Samuel because Samuel and he were on the outs. They disagreed with each other. Samuel had rebuked him publicly. And not only that, Samuel had anointed the next king of Israel, whoever that was going to be. Saul wasn't really sure yet. I'm wondering, why didn't he go after Samuel? Is it because Samuel was recognized even by Saul in his paranoid state as being from God, and therefore he kept his hands off him? I don't know. That's the question I have. Let's go on, verse 6. Now, Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered. Saul was seated, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah. Spear in hand, right? All his officials standing by. He said to them, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you've all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. Saul is falling deeper and deeper into this paranoid delusion. But Doeg, the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse. By the way, remember who Doeg the Edomite was? When David was talking with the priest and got some bread from him, Doeg the Edomite was hanging out there. But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Oh, one more thought. What position did Doeg the Edomite hold in Saul's world? He was his chief shepherd. Wasn't a chief warrior. Wasn't a captain of an army. He was a shepherd. Keep that in mind. He's really not that high up in the hierarchy in Saul's world. So he said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all the men of his family who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, listen now, son of Ahitub. Yes, my lord, he answered. Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword, inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Ahimelech answered the king, pretty brave in his part, I might say. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about the whole affair. But the king said, You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. Then the king ordered the guards at his side, Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials, his guards, were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. They were Israelites. They were not going to raise their hands against the priests of God. The king then ordered Doeg, the guy who had bought him his news, his chief shepherd, You turn and strike down the priests. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. This was his opportunity to rise up within the ranks of Saul's world. This shepherd killed the high priest. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. You know, history, I suppose, is replete with stories of the desperate things that men or women will do to attain power and position. Saul's regular guards, trained warriors all, would not raise a hand against the priests of God, the priests of Yahweh. Doeg, who's an Edomite, he hadn't bought into the whole Jehovah thing. He wasn't a believer. He wasn't a follower of Yahweh, which raises a lot of other questions about Saul, but maybe for another time. Rather far down on the totem pole as far as position and power goes. He was his chief shepherd. And he saw an opportunity. All he had to do was kill the high priest of Israel's religion and all the other priests. And he did. And he took it even further. He destroyed the entire town. He killed all these priests' families and children, all their cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Killed them all. It was, what a brutal thing. Oh. But one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, sorry about these names. You know how I am. I really don't know how to pronounce them. Named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar, That day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would for sure tell Saul, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me as well. You will be safe with me. All right. One of the priests, unbeknownst to Saul, escaped. Abiathar. And he joined David's fugitive band. He became David's high priest. He performed priestly functions for David the rest of David's life. Eventually, he was replaced by Zadok under Solomon's reign, years and years later. But when he informs David about Saul's massacre, David tells him that he had anticipated Doeg's act of treachery and betrayal ever since their earlier encounter at Nob. David then confesses that he himself, however unwittingly, is ultimately responsible for the massacre. He therefore offers refuge to Abiathar, telling him not to be afraid. Saul now seeks the life of both of them, so they become partners in flight. King-elect and priest-elect have joined forces as fellow fugitives. Abiathar is the last of the line of Eli to serve in the priesthood. Now, you remember, Samuel had told Eli, pronounced a curse upon him, that his line would be wiped out, and that the priesthood would not be a perpetual priesthood from his lineage. And Abiathar is the last of that line, because everybody else in that line has been killed by Saul. Later, towards the end of David's life, when the kingship of Israel was up for grabs, though, Abiathar sided with the older brother of Solomon. Now, David had lots of children, and Solomon was actually the third oldest son, if I'm not mistaken. And Abiathar sided with Solomon's older brother Adonijah. And when Solomon ascended to the throne, he spared the life of Abiathar, but he removed him from the priesthood. And at that moment, the prophecy about Eli's line not continuing in the priesthood was completed. Now, to Abiathar, this is what Solomon said to him. To Abiathar the priest, the king said, "Go back to your fields in Anathoth." This is in 1 Kings. "You deserve to die because of his treachery to Solomon." Isn't this amazing? Faithful to David, but not faithful to Solomon. He backed the older brother of Solomon, which in a way politically would make sense because usually it's the oldest son that inherits the kingship, right? First son was dead. Second son declared himself king. And so you see where Abiathar would line up with him, but whatever. He picked the wrong horse in the race. It says, "You deserve to die," Solomon told him, "but I will not put you to death now because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships." So Solomon removed Abiathar from the priesthood of the Lord, fulfilling the word the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli. So there's a lot of things happening here. Now, one last thought. David wrote a psalm about the time when Doeg the Edomite betrayed him to Saul. And David wrote a song, and he's addressing Doeg the Edomite. Picture David facing Doeg the Edomite. Just picture the sarcasm in his voice and the strength and the anger in his voice. I'm going to read this psalm. Again, he's talking to Doeg the Edomite, who had betrayed him and killed all the priests. "Why do you boast of evil, you mighty hero? Why do you boast all day long, you who are a disgrace in the eyes of God?" Doeg wasn't a believer. "You who practice deceit, your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word. You deceitful tongue. Surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. He will snatch you up and pluck you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous will see and fear. They will laugh at you, saying, 'Here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold, who trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others.'" That's what Doeg did. He became strong by wiping out the entire village of priests. He became mighty in the eyes of Saul as being the only one who would obey him when it came to killing the priests. So here's the man who did not make God a stronghold, but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others. But David says, "But I am like an olive tree, flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. For what you have done, I will always praise you." He's talking to God. "In the presence of your faithful people, and I will hope in your name, for your name is good." All right, there's a lot happening here. This is David, for lack of better terms, David is establishing the rebellion. He's surrounded by 400 to 600 men. He's got a small army. He is officially at war with Saul. And a shepherd has risen in Saul's estimation because a shepherd just killed the entire priestly line of Eli with the exception of one. Wiped out his village, killed all the descendants, all the men, women, and children, and their animals, destroyed the city of the priests. The stage has been set for the final battle between Saul and David, which would take place over the next 6 or 7 years. This is going to be a very, very difficult time for David. I've said it before, and it bears repeating. Even in the darkest of times, we don't know what good thing awaits us. Sometimes it seems like God has not heard us. Sometimes it seems like God is ignoring us because of whatever trials or tribulations you're going through. But just like the refiner's fire is necessary to burn off all the dross so that the silver or gold becomes pure, trials and tribulations are used by God to purify us. It's said that the silversmith knows the silver is pure when he can look in the molten silver and see his reflection coming back at him. Until then, the reflection is marred or even not at all because of all the stuff, all the garbage that's in there. So you apply heat and you burn off the dross, and then when you can see your reflection in the silver is pure. It's kind of the way it is with us and God. Trials and tribulations are there to bring to the surface those ugly parts of us that we have not dealt with or that need to be dealt with. And when those are burned off, when you learn that lesson, it's like the creator of the universe can look in us and see his reflection coming back at him. You will look more like God. Even when I went through my darkest time as a provider for my family, as a husband and a father, when we lost almost everything through bankruptcy, through those 2 years, which were a long 2 years for me, what I learned and what God did in me burned off that part of my nature which worshiped money, which was foolish with the money. And my attitude towards money has changed. In fact, about the middle of that period of my life, middle of those 2 years, I remember waking up one morning and praying and saying, God, I hate what I've done to my family. I hate that this has happened because of me. But I've repented, I've changed my ways, and yet I still wake up feeling guilty. When will this end? God's response to me was, and it was as real to me as any one of you sitting in the room talking to me. I heard in my mind, I heard him say, your father didn't just die. Context here. My dad had died the previous year. He'd had a series of issues with cancer, heart attacks, strokes, etc., diabetes. He says, your father didn't just die. He'd been dying for the last 10 years, which was true. My dad's health declined steadily over 10 years till he was done. And he says, your dad didn't just die. He was dying for the last 10 years. Death is rarely instantaneous, and rarely is it painless. You are dying to the sin of foolishness with money. Your death to that sin will not be painless, and it will not be instantaneous. But I guarantee you, at the end of this process, you will feel about money the way I do. And he was right. See, one of my sins in my life was that I would never discuss financial things with my wife. I would buy things, big ticket items sometimes, without ever talking to my wife about it. And that scarred her. That hurt her deeply. And I had this thing in me that if I talk to her about it, she'll just say no. And she'll fight me on it, no matter what it is I want to buy. And so I would just go out and buy it. And this hurt our marriage. And this had a lot to do with the bankruptcy I was going through. And I was just thinking about this the other day. I wanted to purchase something from Amazon, to put into my studio. So I just messaged her. We weren't in the same house. I said, "What do you think? I need to get this I want to get this for my recording stuff at home." And she said, "Sure, let's go for it. Let's do it. We got the money." That conversation would have never happened. Would have never happened prior to this bankruptcy event. So, trials and tribulations are part of God's process to mold us. And it's a lifelong thing. David is getting ready to go through more trials and more tribulations, but it's going to prepare him to be the king that Israel needs. God is shaping and forming David over the next 6 or 7 years as he wrestles with Saul. So, I think that's a good place to stop. Have a great and wonderful day. This is Paige. Here's my coffee. And you know what? It's still very good. Have a wonderful, fabulous day. I'm out of here. Bye-bye. So, what did you think about today's Bible devotional? Email me and let me know your thoughts at ffog@me.com.